This is a special presentation brought to you by the Daf Map, based on one of the lectures given by HaRav Yehonasan Berger Shlita. Please check out our other videos and shiurim at www.thedafmap.com.
Today's shiur begins at the Mishnah that you'll find on the lower part of Daf Nun Daled, 5 lines from the bottom. On the side of our Gemara, you'll notice we have a topic heading, in which we've written Rishima. Rishima is a list. Rishima shel dvorim, a list of situations, of items, shelamrois de metamen tumas meis, even though there is defilement to the dead. Ein ha-Nazir megaleach aleim. It does not result in the Nazir losing the days that he has counted till that point. The einon soisrim hayomim shekvar mona. The defilement in these cases do not erase the days that he has counted till this point. The Mishnah. Avol haschochos. The term avol is a word of contrast. This is in contrast to the previous Mishnah on Daf Mem Tes, where we saw a list of things where the Nazir, when he encounters the defilement, he actually loses whatever he has counted towards his Nazirus up till that point. So in contrast, you have haschochos v'haprois. Schochos, Rashi describes as tree branches that are overshadowing the ground, and under one of the branches there might be a grave, and the Nazir walked by under this tree, and he doesn't know if he walked under the particular branch that's overshadowing the grave. And pros are a similar situation. We have stones protruding from a wall. You can walk under these protruding stones, and there's a grave under one of the stones, and you walked under one of the stones, and you don't know if you walked under the stone that was overshadowing a grave. And of course, in each one of these cases, we're referring to a Nazir having walked over there. Obeis hapras, a Nazir walked through a field in which there had been a grave. The location of the grave was not known, but it was known there was a grave there, and this field had been plowed up. In other words, the body that was there would have been now fragmented because of the plow blade that distributed pieces of the body all over the field. Ve'eretz ho'amim, a Nazir who would enter Eretz ho'amim, that's leaving the land of Israel. There's an additional scenario featured in Maseches Chagiga, I believe, having to a strip of land running through across the northern part of Israel that's called Eretz HaKusim. But for all intents and purposes, Eretz ho'amim is a reference to outside the land of Israel. So there is a tumah that's imposed on Eretz ho'amim. It's a form of tumas meis, death defilement, but if a Nazir goes there, he will not lose the Nazirus that he's counted till that point. V'hagolel v'hadoifek, these are parts of a coffin. The golel and dofek. Truth is that there's a machlokis about what it is, but we're using one of the pirushim, one of the commentaries. Rashi's explanation that Tosfos quotes from Maseches Ksubis is a golel, the cover of a coffin, dofek, the sides of a coffin. So these will communicate tumah as well. The revius dam v'ohel. Revius dam v'ohel is a reference to the liquid quantity known as a quarter of a lug of blood that comes from a corpse. Even though it's metame b'ohel, even though if a person goes into the same room, the same overshadowing, himself and this revius of dam, he will become defiled to the tune of tumas meis, with all that implies. A Nazir doesn't lose out as a result. And rova atzamos as well. The rova kav, a quarter of a kav, it's also a measure of bones. True, it imparts tumas meis through ohel, through being under the same overshadowing, the same overhang. Nevertheless, these cases of Revias Dam and Rov Atzamos, we will see the Nazir does not lose out, even though he becomes defiled, Tumas Meis. The Kelim Hanoige B'Meis, vessels that are in contact with a corpse, if one touches those vessels, so he may become Tomei, but it's not going to result in the Nazir losing out. Uvimei Sifro, Uvimei Gomro, these are two time periods that are associated with someone who was a Mitzora. Someone who was a Mitzora and was determined to be a Mitzora Muchlot. He's set outside of the community. If it's dealing with a walled community, he's set outside of town. In the Midbar, he would be set outside of the Machne Yisrael, away from the community, and until the discoloration decreases, goes away, he's in a state of Gomro. Those are, we're not getting into the details right now of Tzoras, but suffice it to say, for those who are familiar, and you know what a Metzora Muchlot is, this is the period of time that he is Muchlot, and the Yemei Sifro is a reference to the days after the Muchlot, meaning when the Kohen comes and inspects the Metzora and determines that the Tzoras has shrunk or disappeared, so then he still has to observe another week of purification. The starting of that week, he takes a haircut, and at the conclusion of that week, he also cuts his body hairs. That's called Yemei Sifro, the week following the Yemei Gomro. So it's true that he's in a state of tumah, he's in a state of defilement, but al elu ein ha-nazir megaleach. The Nazir does not lose the previous days. We've seen the term megaleach already quite often in the last few shiurim, so we're simply going to, without translating, just make reference to the fact that it means that the Nazir, ein ha-nazir megaleach, does not lose out the days that he's counted up till this point. Umazeh b'shlishi u'b'shvi'i. He goes through the Tumas Meis purification, which involves the third day and the seventh day of his purification week, receiving sprinkling of Pora Aduma ash water mixture. We continue at the top of Omid Beis. The Mishnah continues, V'eino soser es hakoidmin. The Tumah that we've described here does not undo the previous days that he's counted of his Nazirus till that point. Umaschil umoyne miyad, and upon purification, upon reaching the seventh day of the purification week that's necessary to leave Tumas Meis, he then restarts, he picks up his counting, we'll say, from that point on. But Korban ein lo, there's no bringing of sacrifices in these cases, in contrast to that which we saw back on Daf Mem Tes in the Mishnah, which are situations of Tumah that necessitate the Nazir at the end of his Tumah period to bring sacrifices. Not so over here. B'yemes amru, Yemei hazav v'hazova v'yemei hezgeru shel mitzora, harei elu oilin loi. The Mishnah just made reference to other forms of Tumah. Let us say a person had accepted Nazirus and he became a Zav. It's a type of male emission that results in the man becoming Tomei. A Zava applies to a woman, a type of blood release with regard to women, and they become Temeos during that time period. Yemei Hezgero, Shamatzor, those are the week or two that lead up to a confirmed case of Tzoras. So we'll call it a waiting period or an investigation period. Those that's called Yemei Hesgero, when he's in his house, he's not put out of the community because he hasn't been established as a Mitzora Muchlat yet. Those are the Yemei Hesgero. During these time periods, even though the Nazir is very Tomei, nevertheless, these days count toward his Nazirus. He'll continue abstaining from wine and continue avoiding defilement to the dead, even though he's defiled for other reasons. Zav, Zava, Yemei Hezgero of a Mitzora, Harei Elu Oilimo. They actually count. He gets Nazirus credit during those time periods. The Gemara, V'elu Hein Haschachos, What does schachos mean? Maybe you're familiar with the word schach. You're familiar with that, of course, from the case of a sukkah. The word sukkah itself comes from schach, which is called thusly because of the branches that cover you overhead. Ilan hamesach al horetz. This is a reference to what we explained earlier, a tree whose branches are overshadowing the ground, and under one of the branches there is tumas mace, and the Nazir walks under the tree, not knowing whether he walked under the branch that actually overshadows the source of tumah. Praos, what is that? Also mentioned in the Mishnah. Those are avonim hayotzis min hageder, stones that protrude forth from a wall, as we explained earlier. The Mishnah mentioned ve'eretz ho'amim. This was the fourth point mentioned in the Mishnah. On the side of the Gemara, we have a topic heading, which reads as follows: Tumas eretz ho'amim. We're dealing with the tumah. I dare say it's a rabbinic form of tumah that was imposed on the area outside of Israel. The rabbis imposed this tumah so as to discourage people from leaving Eretz Yisrael. Kishigozru tumo al Eretz Ha'amim, our note continues, when the rabbis impose this form of defilement, Hayim gozu rak al gusha, is it a defilement based on the gush means dirt, the ground, oy gozu nami al avira, or does their gezerah extend to the airspace? It sounds a little bit, we'll say, abstract. What's the difference? Nafkamina, there is a difference. Hecho de nichnas le'eretz ha'amim b'shida. If a person left Israel while contained in a shida, in a box, in a chest. The mishum gusha leka, if he is contained in this large enclosed structure. I don't want to use the word vessel, because the word vessel in Hebrew, it means a kli, and then that gets us into a more complicated area of halacha concerning a vessel and its sizes. But certainly if you're dealing with a vessel that measures 40 sa'ah, 40 sa'ah is the size of a mikveh that everyone is probably familiar with, measuring 3 cubic amos. If a person is in a chest or in a box like that and enters the Eretz Ha'amim, the Mishum Gusha Leka, there would be no problem of Tumah affecting you if the Gezerah was made on the dirt. By being in this box, so you are protected, so to speak, from the dirt. Mishum Avira Ika, however, if the Gezerah was imposed on the airspace, so you are in the airspace of Eretz Ha'amim. This is an approach, an introduction to the sugya that will continue on Nun Hey Amud Aleph. But for the time being, we want you just to hear these terms and these ideas. The Gemara will debate this and carry on much further than our introduction. But Gemara yesh nisayon lahochiach. In the Gemara, there's an attempt to prove the agusha, that the gzera was in fact a gzera, a rabbinic defilement imposed on the dirt. Me'achar shekotoni, because in the Mishnah, which mentions different forms of tumas mace, of death defilement, the Mishnah mentions umaze gimel v'zayin, that there is a sprinkling of the paraduma purification water, the red heifer ash water mixture, that is characteristic, that's used as a method of purifying from your standard tumas mace. This idea of a sprinkling is relevant only if you say that the gzera was imposed on the dirt. And the idea of the dirt or the ground is based on the idea that there may very well be bodies buried anywhere when you're in Chutz La'aretz. This idea of Hazah on the 3rd and 7th days would be inapplicable to the gezerah of Eretz Amim if it were posed on airspace. Let us now turn to the Gemara. The quote from the Mishnah of Eretz Amim, Ibaya Laho, the Gemara asks, Eretz Amim, this defilement imposed on land outside of Israel. Mishum Aviro Gozer Olel, Oy Dilmo Mishum Gusha Gozer Olel. Is it a ruling, a rabbinic imposition on the airspace or on the ground, the dirt? Toshma. So in order to conclude this, the Gemara attempts to answer. In the Mishnah, along with citing Eretz Amim, it said, Umaze b'shlishi ub'shvi. The paraduma water is used during the 3rd and 7th days of the purification week. Granted that a person had been in Eretz Amim, he becomes defiled, so he has to expose it, he has to be subjected to Hazor on the 3rd and 7th days. The Amris Mishum Avira, if you were to think that the rabbinic tumah imposed on Eretz Amim was imposed on the airspace, Hazor Lomali, why would there be any sprinkling? Elolav Mishum Gusha. The fact that there is a sprinkling, it shows that the tumah that was imposed on the dirt. Let's get a little bit more of an explanation by looking at the Tosfos. You'll notice Tosfos Toshma on the end of the medium lines. Toshma umaze b'shlishi ub'shvi v'amrus mishum avira hazor lomali. The eno svora shitztachu b'chiyai gavna. It's not logical to think that under circumstances like that, hazoas gimel v'zayin. Hayil umitame afki hefsek beino uvein agush. If you hold that the tumah is on the airspace, that means that you will be tameh even if there is something blocking you from the ground, from the dirt. The eno klal me'inyan tumas oyol hames. The tumah, if you say it's mishum avira, and as we just said, even if you're blocked from the ground, you still will become tameh. It shows us that this is nothing to do with the rules of oyol hames, overshadowing the dead. When we speak about overshadowing the dead, if there is some type of interposition between you and the body, or you and the grave, you would not become tameh. When you explain Tumas Eretz Amim in terms of Avir, we're saying you'll become tameh anyway. So you see that you're dealing with something that's not a subcategory of fitting within the topic of Oyel Hames, overshadowing the dead. In standard overshadowing of the dead, that's Lahatzir Chazor Gimel V'Zayin. Then, if you overshadow the dead in a standard situation, you are subject to receiving the sprinklings. Now, since our Mishnah says that for Eretz Amim there is Hazoaz, the Gimel V'Zayin, 3rd and 7th days, it must be that you're dealing with a tumah imposed on the dirt, not the airspace. We turn back to the Gemara. You notice we have a long marking, a daled dechiyah, long rejection, 4 lines. We reject this. I'll tell you that the tumah imposed on Eretz Amim is in fact an airspace tumah. V'chi katani, the teaching of Mazeh Gimel V'Zayin, Ashara, it's going on the other points mentioned in the Mishnah. It's not referring to the case of Eretz Amim. Just because the Mishnah said Mazeh b'shlishi u'b'shvi, it doesn't mean that halacha applies to everything in the Mishnah. Hachi nami mistaber, and in fact, this approach is quite likely. So let's go over the point again. To prove that Eretz Amim is mishum gush because of the din, the halacha of Mazeh Shlishu Shvi, that's not absolute. It's true the Mishnah teaches Shlishu Shvi, but it's not a reference to Eretz Amim. It's a reference to Ashara, the other Sha'ar, the other points mentioned in the Mishnah. And this in fact can be proven. It's logical, midekotoni. It says in the Mishnah as well, v'kelim hanoigim b'meis. Vessels that are in contact with a body. Hani kelim b'nei hazah inun. These vessels that came into contact with a body, if a person touches those vessels, do those vessels cause a person to subject himself or to be subjected to the hazah? It's not true. A person who touches vessels that touched a corpse, it's true he becomes tamei. He's tamei, tumas erev, he's a one-day tumah. He does not need hazah, gimel, v'zayin, and yet kelim hanoigim b'meis is taught in the Mishnah. Eloshma mino ashara. This shows us that the presence of mazeh b'shlishi applies to most of the items in the Mishnah, but not to everything. It doesn't apply to someone who touched kelim hanoigim b'meis, and it doesn't apply to eretz amim. So I could tell you that eretz amim, in fact, is a tumah imposed on the avir, and mazeh shlishi shvi is not related to that. We continue at the top of Nun Hey Omen Aleph. Lema ketanoi. Can we say that the issue of the basis of Tumas Eretz Amim, is it Avir or is it Gush, in fact is a Machlokes Tanoim? So the Gemara presents this as a possibility. Notice, by taking your bird's eye view of this Omid Gemara, this topic goes down till the sixth line from the bottom. You'll notice triangles, and on the side of the Gemara there are nosei, mivne heading. These are four arba dalid gishos, four approaches, shlavim, stages. Lahasbira machlokes bein Rebbe Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. We're going to see a Tanaic source where these two Tanoim appear. Someone who enters the Eretz Ha'amim region, meaning out, they've left Eretz Yisrael while contained within a Shida Tevo Migdal, a box or a chest. We will see that Rebbe holds that if you entered Eretz Ha'amim, though you're contained in this, we'll call this protective environment, the box or the chest, you nevertheless will become Tamei. And Rabbi Yehuda says you do not become Tamei, you're protected. And based on that, we want to say that the issue is a machlokes of Eretz concerning Eretz Ha'amim. Is it Mishum Avir or Mishum Gush? The ideas, ideas that will be presented in this Gemara are, of course, number one, Mishum Gush Avira. And a second topic that's going to come up has to do with something called Ohel Zorok. An Ohel is a large enough structure, like a chest, a closet, a portable closet, whereby it is, we could say, large enough to be considered an Ohel, a self-contained structure. And such an entity, a standard Ohel, would be an interposition, a block between you and Tumah. In other words, if you were in a real Ohel Zorok means a thrown Ohel, an Ohel in movement. But if you were in a stationary Ohel and there was Tumah outside of the Ohel, you would be protected because you're contained within the Ohel. We turn to the Gemara, top line, Leimo Ketanoi. Can we say that the two choices as to explaining why there's Tumas Eretz Ha'amim, is it Mishum Gush or Mishum Avir, is in fact a Machlokas Tanoim? And it reads, the source says, Hanichnas Eretz Ha'amim b'shida tevo migdal, one who enters the region known as Eretz Ha'amim, the person is contained within one of these structures, a shida tevo migdal. We mentioned already a large box or a chest. Rebbe metamei, Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda metaher. Rebbe says he is not protected by the Shita Teva Migdal, and Rabbi Yossi Rabbi says he is protected. My lav, Rebbe Sova, Rebbe who says he is Tomei, Mishum Avira. The tumah that's imposed is imposed on the airspace. Hence the standard idea of being contained with an interposition has no relevance. That has relevance only when you're dealing with the ground, with the possibility of a body being buried in the ground, and hence they made a gzera on the ground. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda Savar, Mishum Gusha. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda says you are protected because the original gzera was only on the dirt, the ground of Eretz O'Amim. Well, if that were the end of the sugya, so we would say gush versus avir is a machlokes tanoim. The sugya does not end here, as you can see. But before we go further, we glance at the Rashi at the top. My love, the Rebbe Savar Mishum Aviro Gazru Alel. Rebbe, who was metame, the person that was contained within the Shita Teva Migdal, holds the tumah is on the airspace. V'ilu hacha kevan de nichnas avir milamalo kashein psuchim. Imagine this. Let's see, this box or this chest were open from above. He's blocked from below, but above it were open. We'll read again. Kevan de nichnas avir milamalo kashein psuchim. Or derech psuchim, when these are open from on top or from doors on the side of these boxes or chests. Have Tomei, he will become Tomei. Sharei nichnas le'avir Eretz O'Amim, because he's entered the region called Eretz O'Amim. It doesn't mean that the box is necessarily open. Even if it's not open, Rebbe would say you become Tomei, because if it were open, the tumah would enter, indicating to us that the tumah was imposed on the airspace. And Rashi continues, Rabbi Yossi B'Yudasav are Mishum Gusha v'lo Mishum Avira. The tumah was imposed strictly on the ground, not the air. V'kevan de karkoi shida teva migdal mafsik beino levein ha-gusha have Torah. Since the floor of the box remains an interposition, a blockage between you and the dirt, so you remain Torah, because as Rabbi Yossi B'Yudah says, the tumah was imposed on the ground. We continue in the Gemara. Loi. We reject that analysis of the machlokes. The kulei almo mishum gusha. Take note, and we like to do this from time to time with Gemara markings. You can easily navigate. Just skip to the next triangle, and you see elo de kulei almo mishum avira. So you can see how the Gemara takes extreme different approaches. The initial approach was to suggest that avir gush was a machlokes tanoim. This approach and the next approach say, no, that's not their machlokas at all. Rather, and here we're at our second approach, is declare mishum gusha. Everyone agrees that the tumah was imposed on the gush, on the floor, on the ground, on the dirt. Well then, who needs explanation? The shita that says that your tomei would need explanation. More sovar oil zorok shmei oil. Rabbi Yehuda, who says your tahor, is of the opinion that an ohel zorok means an ohel that's in movement. It's not stationary. You're traveling in this box into the Eretz O'Amim, so you're in movement. That's zorok. Zorok literally means thrown, cast, or movement. An ohel, a contained structure that's in movement, has the properties of an ohel, meaning it blocks. It serves as an interposition. Umar Sovar, Rebbe, who says you're Tomei, says Lo Shmei Ohel, that once it's in movement, it doesn't work anymore to block you, so that the tumah that's coming from below simply penetrates the floor of the box in which you are located. Doesn't work as an ohel, as a chatzitza, as an interposition. So at this point, when you look at Shitas Rabbi Yossi B'Yudah, we're saying that he holds an oil zorok shmei oil, that an oil in movement works to block tumah. And we're now going to question that. V'ha Tanya, Rabbi Yossi B'Yudah Omer, teva shehi malea kilim. A teva, it's one of the words we mentioned above, the Shida Tevo Migdal, the box, Shimlea Kalim, that's filled with articles, vessels filled with clothing, Vizarka al Penei Hames Be'ohel, and he cast this box filled with vessels over a body that was in a room. Tameah. The contents of the box become defiled. The box, you can see in movement, does not work to block the tumah. Its contents become defiled. If you had a chest that was stationary in the same room in which there was a corpse, then the contents, Torah, remain undefiled. They're protected because it's an ohel kavua. Rashi across from here says, "Vim hoisa munachas Torah dekevan de munachas havilo kavua umatzelos b'fnei atuma v'lo have koel zorok." If it's stationary, so it's not an ohel in movement. So to say that Reb Yossi Rebuto holds that an oil zorok is considered an oil, functions as an oil, functions to block tumah, it's not true. So we go back to the drawing board. Both Rebbe and Reb Yossi Rebuto will say that tumas eretz ha'amim is a gzera imposed on the airspace. Umor sovar Reb Yossi Rebuto that says you remain tohar when you entered b'shida teva migdal. Kevan delo shchicha lo gozu bei rabbanan. Even though he tells you that a moving oil doesn't work to block tumah, since you're dealing with something that's lo shchicha, unusual. It's unusual to enter eretz amim in a box or in a chest. So it's an unusual situation, and you're dealing here with a topic that's purely rabbinic. When did the rabbis impose their restrictions or stringencies? When you're dealing with cases that are commonplace. This is lo shicha, it's unusual. And therefore, they didn't impose any tumah. Umor Sova Rebbe says, Afagav de lo shicha gozru be rabbanan. This is a very unusual situation. It's an unusual position. Generally speaking, we say that Milsa de lo shchicha lo gozu be'rabonan. Rebbe says that even though it's unusual, they nevertheless imposed tumah all the same. V'hot tanyon. Here you have support. Hanichnas l'eretz ha'amim b'shida tevu migdal tohar. One who entered the eretz ha'amim in a shida tevu, in a box or a chest, he's tohar. And this, of course, would be a source. There's no name in it, but it would be in accordance with Reb Yossi Bar Yehuda. But Koron b'sfina v'skaria, if one enters Eretz Amim in a chariot, in a boat, Iskaria is a type of boat, a sailboat, the person will be tomei. And we can explain that because that is shchia, that is a normal way of entering Eretz Ha'amim. We continue with another approach, and in order to appreciate what we're to assume, notice stage 2 and 3. In stage 2, we said everyone agrees mishum gush. In stage 3, we said everyone agrees mishum avir. Rashi here, notice on the toward the end of the narrow lines, Viboyasema, we have a little star in the Rashi. Another approach says to kulialmo mishum gusha, ula kulialmo nami oyel zoruk shmei oyel. So we're going to accept Rashi and work with these assumptions that everyone holds that the gzera was imposed on the dirt, and that a moving oyel functions as an oyel, functions to block tumah. So now we have to explain, especially the shita of Rebbe. Why is he metame? So we continue now in the Gemara text. V'iboy seima hacha shema yoitzi roishay v'rubo l'sham pliki. Their argument is an argument over, do we worry about someone who is contained in a protective environment. As Rashi said, Oyel Zorok, everyone agrees Shmei Oyel. If that's the case, why then would Rebbe Metameh? Because he says we have to consider the possibility of someone literally sticking their head out, or the majority of their body outside. Rosh Havruva means one's head with the majority of their body, their torso, outside of these contained units. So that even though right now you are totally contained, we might nevertheless impose tumah because of someone actually sticking their heads out, which then would have them literally overshadowing the gush, and of course encountering real tumah in a rabbinic sense. So, as we go on, the Hatanyan, here is a Tanaic source that supports this analysis, which, let's just go over it again. Everyone holds that the tumah was imposed only on the dirt, and everyone holds an oil zorok shmei oil. Nevertheless, Rebbe will say you're tomei, because Rebbe makes a gzera, you might stick your head, rosh havru, your head and the majority of your body outside of the protective environment, and therefore even if you don't stick your head out, we impose tumah, which is a standard type of chumrah or gzera that the Rabbanan make. And Rabbi Yosef Yehuda says, no, I don't make a gzera. If you actually stuck your head out, fine, then you will become tomei. But if you don't stick your head out, you remain tohar. So the Tanaic source supports this. V'hatanya, Rabbi Yosef Yehuda Omer, hanichnos l'Eretz Yisrael b'shita tevu migdal tohar. One who enters the Eretz Yisrael while contained within the box or the chest, you remain tohar ad sheyotzi l'sham rosho o rubo, until you stick your head out or the majority of your body out. Literally, in other words, in actual terms. But as long as you don't, and you remain in the Shita Teva Migdal, you remain Tohar. We look at Rashi on the second line, under the second of the wider lines of Rashi, Vatanya de Messiah, a Tanaic source supporting this, the Rabbi Yossi, Eino Mitamat Shiyotzi Rosh Rubo, until you actually stick your head out. But before, there was no sticking of your head out, and yet Rabbi Yosef said that the vessel containing articles and you threw it over a body, they become tomei. Then they're dealing with inanimate objects. You're not dealing with someone sticking their head out. Why does Rabbi Yosef say you're tomei? The articles are tomei. Lav mishum de kosover oil zorok lav shmei oil. It's not because he holds that the oil in movement is not an oil. El kima de zorka komapik le mitoras oil mashvi le toras kli. Since in that particular case the box was thrown, it was thrown over the body. You're showing through your action of throwing it that it loses its halachic status of ohel, a structure, and it becomes a mere vessel. And in the Seifa of that very source, it said if that box were stationary, the contents would be tar. And note, even though it's something that's ordinarily moved. So from the fact that it's moved, that doesn't cancel its status as being an ohel. But if it's thrown, you're showing that it's not viewed in your mind as a structure, but rather as a vessel. And a vessel does not protect its contents when you're dealing with an oil hames. With that, we conclude our shiur for today.
This was a presentation of the Daf Map. We hope you enjoyed it. Please like and subscribe to be informed of our other videos. For resources and more information, please visit our website at www.thedafmap.com.